I'll never forget the sound of that knock. It wasn't the polite kind you get from a neighbor dropping by to borrow sugar. It was sharp, deliberate, and carried the weight of authority, like a police officer demanding you open up. My chest tightened before I even reached for the door. But before I tell you what happened that day, let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this will make sense until you know the life we thought we were starting. My name is Daniel Hayes. A year ago, my wife Claire and I thought we'd finally earned our peace. I had spent 25 years as a crime reporter. I lived in the chaos of courtrooms, city council meetings, and late-night phone calls from whistleblowers. I had seen men in suits hauled away in handcuffs, and neighbors turn on each other when the truth came out. It was a good career, but it drained me. Claire was no stranger to battles herself. She was a property lawyer who specialized in real estate disputes, boundary fights, fraudulent deeds, shady developers. She was sharp, quick with details, and had a way of making people confess things they hadn't meant to reveal. I'd always admired that about her, but years of high-pressure cases had worn her down too. So when the chance came to buy a log cabin in the mountains of Colorado, we didn't hesitate. It was everything we'd dreamed of. A wooden porch overlooking a valley, a view of snow-capped peaks in the distance, and thick pine trees standing like sentinels around us. Every morning the world smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. Every night the stars shone so brightly it felt like we'd moved into a painting. For the first few weeks, it was paradise. We waved to neighbors while walking down the road. We met folks at the general store and swapped small talk about weather and wildlife. We even hosted a barbecue one weekend. Nothing fancy, just burgers and potato salad, and a few locals showed up with pies and stories about mountain life. For the first time in years, I felt my pulse slow down. No deadlines, no bosses. Just the sound of Claire humming in the kitchen and the mountain wind rustling through the trees. But paradise has a way of showing cracks. Sometimes trouble comes wearing a smile. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, crisp and quiet. I was sitting on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching golden aspen leaves flutter down onto the grass. Claire was inside, humming along with the radio as she made pancakes. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. I looked up to see a white SUV climbing our driveway. The vehicle gleamed, spotless, too spotless for a mountain road where dust clung to everything. The driver's door opened and out stepped a woman who radiated authority. She wore a navy blazer and carried a clipboard. Her stride was brisk, confident, like someone who was used to walking into places and being obeyed. She climbed the steps of our porch and gave me a smile that was professional but not warm. "Good morning," she said, extending her hand. "My name is Chloe Foster. I'm with the Mountain Community Standards Board. I'm here for a routine property compliance inspection." Her words slid out smoothly, but something about them didn't sit right with me. I shook her hand but raised an eyebrow. Community Standards Board? I wasn't aware we had one of those. This area doesn't have an HOA. Chloe gave a small laugh, as though she'd been through this before. "We're not exactly an HOA. We're a county-affiliated board. We ensure properties stay consistent with historical and community standards. Paint colors, modifications, landscaping. It's just routine, nothing to worry about." Her badge hung from a lanyard, the photo sharp and shiny. At first glance, it looked official, but as I glanced closer, little details stood out. The font wasn't quite right, the seal looked printed instead of stamped, and the expiration date had already passed. Still, I didn't want to accuse her of anything, not yet. "All right," I said cautiously. "So what exactly are you checking for?" Before she could answer, the door opened behind me. Claire stepped out, wiping her hands on a towel. Her polite smile was the kind she used for door-to-door salesmen. "What's this about?" Claire asked. Chloe shifted her attention smoothly. "Mrs. Hayes? Just a standard check. We've had some concerns raised in the area, nothing personal." Her eyes flicked across our cabin, sharp and calculating. She snapped a photo of our license plate, then scribbled notes onto her clipboard. She asked how long we'd owned the property, whether we'd repainted, and if we'd made notifications. Her questions were fast, rehearsed, almost mechanical. Claire's suspicion showed in her tone. "May I see your credentials again?" Chloe handed them over without hesitation, smiling with the confidence of someone who had practiced this routine 100 times. Claire examined it closely, her lawyer's mind scanning every detail. She didn't say anything right away, but I could see the slight tightening of her jaw. She handed it back and folded her arms. Chloe, unfazed, pulled a set of papers from her folder. They looked official, watermarks, signatures, seals. She handed them to me. "You'll need to provide documentation proving your paint color complies with historical guidelines," she said briskly. "If not, there may be fines. I'll be back in a week to collect your response." I stared at the papers. "Fines? For what, exactly?" "For non-compliance," she said simply. That word, non-compliance, it grated on me. We'd chosen this cabin because there was no HOA. The idea that someone could suddenly appear demanding proof our paint color was compliant felt absurd. Chloe tucked the papers back into her folder, her smile returning as she walked back toward her SUV. Before climbing in, she gave us a look that I couldn't quite read. Smug, maybe? Even victorious. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said. "I'll be in touch." The SUV disappeared down the gravel road, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than before. Claire was already flipping through the papers, her eyes scanning each line like she was cross-examining a witness. "Daniel," she said finally, her voice low and serious, "these forms, they're real county templates. I've seen them before in a corruption case. Someone sold blank documents to scammers." I rubbed the back of my neck. My gut told me the same thing hers did. This wasn't random. This was calculated. That night, we sat together on the porch. The mountains glowed purple under the sunset, but neither of us saw the beauty. Claire kept turning the papers over in her hands, tapping them against her knee. "This woman knew too much," she murmured. She knew the right questions, the right paperwork, the right tone. Someone trained her, someone with access to official systems. Her words hung in the cool evening air like smoke. I didn't say it out loud, but deep down I already knew. We weren't dealing with some nosy neighbor. This was something bigger. And I was right. The next morning, Claire shook me awake. Her voice was tight with panic. "Daniel, look at this." She shoved her laptop toward me. On the screen, our property tax account was flagged for review. At the same time, 3 brand new bills sat in our mailbox, charges from agencies we'd never heard of. My stomach sank. Less than 24 hours after Chloe's visit, the walls were already closing in, and I had no idea then just how much worse it was going to get. The morning after Chloe's visit, I stood at the end of our driveway with a handful of envelopes, staring at them like they were poisonous snakes. 3 new bills had arrived overnight, each with official-looking seals and stern language. The first was from something called the Mountain Regional Water Authority, a $200 connection fee that we supposedly overlooked when we moved in. The second demanded $500 for an environmental compliance inspection before utilities could continue service. The third was the most bizarre, a community infrastructure development fee for $780, with threats of legal action if unpaid within 10 days. Altogether, over $1,400 in unexpected charges. I carried the envelopes back up to the cabin, each step heavier than the last. Claire was waiting at the kitchen table, her laptop open, her coffee untouched. She looked up at me, and I saw in her eyes the same fear I was feeling. "Let me guess," she said, her voice tight. "More bills?" I dropped the envelopes onto the table. They scattered across the wood like playing cards, but there was no game here, just intimidation. Claire picked one up and skimmed it. "Look at this," she tapped the letterhead. "This Water Authority. It doesn't even exist in county records. I checked last night." "So they're fake?" I asked. She nodded. "Fake, but convincing. The language, the formatting, it's all designed to make you panic and pay before asking questions." I sat down heavily. But who has the time to put all this together? Who would target us this way? She leaned back, crossing her arms. "It's not just us. Think about it. If they're sending these to multiple new residents, and even half of them pay without question, that's thousands of dollars flowing into someone's pocket." I rubbed my face with both hands. "Feels like we're being bled dry, one paper cut at a time." Claire didn't laugh. That afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID showed our utility provider. "Mr. Hayes," the representative said, polite but firm, "we've received notice from county oversight that your property has been flagged for environmental review. Unfortunately, until the inspection is completed and the $500 fee is processed, we'll have to suspend service." I felt my pulse spike. "Hold on," I said. "County oversight? Who gave you that notice?" "I'm sorry, sir," the rep replied. "We're required to honor official county requests. I can't disclose more than that." I slammed the phone down harder than I should have. Claire looked up sharply. "They're cutting off our power," I said through clenched teeth. "Unless we pay." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't just harassment, Daniel. This is a coordinated attack." By evening, our kitchen table was covered in papers, fake bills, strange notices, and half-written notes as Claire tried to untangle the mess. I watched her scan documents with the same focus she used in court, but this time there was no jury to convince, no judge to appeal to, just a faceless network pulling strings behind the curtain. "I know how to fight in a courtroom," she muttered, almost to herself, "but this is like fighting fog. Every time I grab onto something, it disappears." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out, together." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me, because deep down, I wasn't sure we could. The next day, things escalated. We received a call from our mortgage company. The representative's voice was apologetic, but the words hit me like a hammer. "Mr. Hayes, someone filed a property dispute claim questioning your ownership of the cabin. Until it's resolved, we're required to freeze your equity." I nearly dropped the phone. "What? That's ridiculous. We bought this place legally." "I understand, sir," the rep said, sounding genuinely sorry, "but regulations require us to act on any ownership dispute, frivolous or not." When I told Claire, she went pale. "This is bigger than bills, Daniel. They're trying to strip us of our rights to the house." For the first time since moving here, I felt a surge of real fear. Not annoyance, not suspicion. Fear. That evening, we sat on the porch, the mountains glowing orange in the sunset, but instead of peace, there was tension so thick I could barely breathe. Claire stared at the stack of papers in her lap. "Someone's orchestrating this," she said quietly. "They know the system inside and out. They know how to make everything look legitimate enough to scare us." Her words chilled me, because she was right. This wasn't random harassment. This was a playbook, one designed to overwhelm, confuse, and isolate us. The following morning, our first brush with law enforcement came, though not in the way I expected. A knock at the door. This one was different, softer, almost hesitant. When I opened it, I found Deputy Frank Brooks standing there. He was in his late 40s, with a weathered face that spoke of long mountain winters. His uniform was neat, but his posture was relaxed. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," he tipped his hat slightly. "Mind if I come in for a moment?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. Inside, Frank looked around the cabin, then settled into a chair at the kitchen table. His eyes landed on the mountain of papers. "That's what I wanted to talk about," he said. Claire joined us, arms folded tightly. "What's going on, Deputy?" Frank sighed. "Look, I don't know how deep this runs, but I've had 3 other families report similar problems in the past month. Fake bills, threatening letters, supposed officials showing up at their doors. When I saw Chloe Foster's name mentioned, I figured I'd better pay you a visit." Claire leaned forward. "So you know her?" Frank nodded slowly. "I've seen her around, claims she's part of some oversight board, but when I checked county records, nothing. Still, she's convincing. Half the folks she visits just pay up to avoid trouble." I clenched my fists. "And you can't stop her?" Frank looked at me evenly. "Not without evidence. Everything she hands out looks official. People are scared, and by the time they realize something is wrong, she's already gone." I exchanged a glance with Claire. Her eyes were blazing. "Then we'll get you evidence." Frank gave a small, almost sad smile. "Careful, Mrs. Hayes. People who push back tend to find themselves under even more pressure." His warning hung heavy in the air long after he left. That night, Claire and I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin felt like a threat. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if we lost everything? What if our retirement dream turned into a nightmare we couldn't escape? At some point I dozed off, but I was jolted awake by Claire's voice in the dark. "Daniel?" she whispered. "We're not crazy, right? This is real." I turned toward her, saw the fear in her eyes. "It's real," I said firmly, "and we'll fight it." But even as I spoke, doubt gnawed at me again, because deep down, I wasn't sure we could. The next week, Chloe returned. This time she didn't come alone. 2 men in plain clothes stood beside her SUV, arms crossed, eyes scanning our property like hawks. She approached the porch with her clipboard and that same polished smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she said sweetly, "just checking in on your compliance paperwork. I trust you've had time to gather your documents?" Claire's jaw tightened. "We've spoken with the sheriff's office, so whatever game you're playing, it ends now." Claire's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew sharper. "Oh, I think you'll find the county takes compliance very seriously. Ignoring these notices could lead to severe consequences." Her words were sugar-coated poison, and standing there I realized just how dangerous this woman really was. Because this wasn't about paint colors or paperwork. This was about control, about power. And she wasn't going to stop until she had it. If the first week felt like a paper storm, the second week felt like a war. The envelopes never stopped. Every day I walked to the mailbox, praying I'd find nothing more than junk flyers. But instead, there were more official-looking notices: environmental fees, septic evaluations, road maintenance surcharges. Each one carried the same message: pay up or face consequences. I stacked them on the kitchen table until they formed a mountain of threats. Some were written with cold, bureaucratic language. Others were nastier, more personal, hinting that we didn't belong here, that we weren't real mountain people. One night, I found Claire sitting at the table at 2 a.m, her hair messy, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had papers spread everywhere, notes scribbled in the margins, arrows pointing out inconsistencies. "Look at this," she said, jabbing at one of the bills. "The letterhead matches one county department, but the signature is from another. Whoever's making these knows the system, but not perfectly. That's a mistake we can use." I admired her determination, but her voice trembled, and her hands shook when she reached for her coffee. My wife, the woman who'd stared down ruthless developers in court, was cracking, and it broke me to watch it happen. "We can't keep living like this," I whispered. Claire's eyes softened. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then we fight harder. I wanted to believe her, but the next day proved just how much harder things were about to get. It started with whispers. At the general store, where neighbors once greeted us warmly, conversation stopped when we walked in. Smiles were replaced by stiff nods. People avoided eye contact, muttering to each other as we passed. I brushed it off at first. Maybe we were imagining it. But then Mrs. Carter, the elderly woman who'd brought us a pie on our move-in day, turned her back on Claire in the produce aisle. Claire froze, stunned, before quietly setting down her basket and walking out. "Claire," I said, catching up to her outside, "what just happened?" She shook her head, her jaw tight. "They're turning against us." And she was right. A few days later, Deputy Frank showed up again, his cruiser crunching up the gravel drive. He stepped onto the porch, hat in hand, his expression grim. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I think you should know, Chloe's been holding meetings at the community center." Claire stiffened. "What kind of meetings?" Frank sighed. "She calls them safety meetings, says she's concerned about maintaining the community's values, and she's been using your names, claims you're stirring up trouble, disrespecting local traditions." I felt my stomach drop. "She's poisoning them against us." Frank nodded. "She's got photos too. I haven't seen them myself, but folks say she's showing pictures of you two walking property lines, talking to neighbors, making it look like harassment." Claire's face flushed with anger. "That's evidence gathering. We were trying to figure out who was behind these fake bills." "I know," Frank said, holding up a hand, "but not everyone sees it that way. She's good at spinning stories, and people around here, they trust anyone who looks official." I leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Frank's expression was heavy, weighed down by years of small-town politics. "Keep your heads down. Document everything. I'm working on it, but until I've got solid proof, my hands are tied." Claire crossed her arms. "With respect, Deputy, keeping our heads down hasn't worked so far." Frank gave a small nod, almost apologetic. "Then be careful. Folks can get riled up quick when they think their way of life's being threatened." A week later, we got our first taste of just how riled up they could get. Frank was right. Chloe organized a meeting at the community center, and though we hadn't been invited, word got back to us through our neighbor, Hannah. "You should come," she urged when she stopped by with a plate of cookies, her brown eyes full of concern. "I don't like what she's saying. You need to hear it for yourselves." Claire and I exchanged a look. Going sounded like walking into a trap, but not going meant letting her control the narrative. That evening we drove to the community center, our hearts pounding as we pulled into the gravel lot. Cars filled every space. Inside, the small hall buzzed with voices. When we stepped through the doors, 30 pairs of eyes turned toward us. The warmth that once lived in this community was gone. What I saw instead was suspicion, distrust. Chloe stood at the front, a projector casting slides onto a screen behind her. She looked calm, professional, every inch the authority figure she pretended to be. "Well, speak of the devil," she said smoothly, gesturing toward us. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, thank you for joining us." Her tone was sugary sweet, but I could hear the venom beneath. We took seats in the back, the air thick with tension. Chloe clicked her remote, and the projector displayed a photo of Claire standing near a fence line. "Here we have Mrs. Hayes, caught trespassing on a neighbor's property. And here," she clicked again, revealing a blurry photo of me speaking to someone on their porch, "seen interrogating longtime residents about private community matters." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire shot to her feet. "That's a lie. I was walking our boundary line, and Daniel was asking about the fake bills we've been receiving." Chloe smiled widened, patient, and condescending. "See how defensive they are? That's because they know they've been caught." The room buzzed with whispers. I saw people I'd shared drinks with, people I thought were friends, staring at us like we were intruders. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chloe continued, her voice smooth, "this couple has been causing disruption since the day they arrived. They question local authorities, they disrespect our traditions, and if we allow this behavior to continue, what will it mean for the future of our community?" The whispers turned into murmurs of agreement. My stomach twisted. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched my arm. "Daniel," she whispered, "they're buying it." I stood up, my voice louder than I intended. "We are not the enemy here. Someone is running a scam, bleeding people dry with fake bills and fake authority, and you're letting them turn you against your neighbors." For a moment, silence, and then a voice from the front row, Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter's husband. "Or maybe," he said coldly, "you two just don't belong here." The words hit like a slap. Claire gasped softly, her face pale. Chloe closed her laptop with a decisive snap. "Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think we all know what needs to be done." The meeting ended in a flurry of whispers and cold stares. As we walked out, I felt the weight of every eye on us. Neighbors who had once waved with smiles now glared with suspicion. In the parking lot, Hannah caught up to us. "Don't give up," she said quickly. "I don't trust her either, and I've been keeping records, screenshots, recordings, everything." Claire grasped her hand tightly. "You're a lifesaver, Hannah." But as we drove home, the truth settled in my gut like a stone. We weren't just fighting fake bills anymore. We were fighting an entire community that had been turned against us. The real fallout began that very night. Around midnight, we were jolted awake by a loud crack against the side of the cabin. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering, and grabbed the flashlight by the dresser. Claire clutched my arm, her eyes wide from fear. "What was that?" she whispered. I crept to the window and shined the beam outside. For a split second, I saw movement, a figure disappearing into the tree line. At the base of the porch steps lay a rock the size of my fist. When I opened the door, the cold night air bit my skin. Scribbled across the rock in black marker were 3 words: "Get out now." Claire gasped when she saw it. She hugged herself tightly, her face pale in the moonlight. "Daniel, they're escalating." I wrapped my arm around her. "They're trying to scare us, but we're not leaving." But still, as I stood there staring into the dark woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The next morning, things got worse. A knock at the door. Claire and I tensed immediately, bracing for Chloe's smug face. But instead, it was our neighbor, Mark. He was a big man with broad shoulders, usually friendly, but not today. "You two need to cut this out," he growled, jabbing a finger at me. "Chloe says you're stirring up trouble, that you're making us look bad with your complaints. If you don't like it here, leave. Don't drag the rest of us down with you." Claire's voice shook with anger. "Mark, you've known us for months. Do we look like scammers to you?" But his eyes were cold. "All I know is, since you showed up, this community's been nothing but drama. We don't need outsiders ruining things." He turned and stomped away, leaving dust swirling in the driveway. Claire sank into a chair. By the time October rolled in, the mountains had turned gold and red with fall colors, but inside our cabin, the air was heavy with dread. The harassment never slowed, it only evolved. What started as fake bills had now turned into phone calls at all hours. Sometimes it was a robotic voice demanding payment. Sometimes it was silence, the caller hanging up the moment we answered. Other times it was worse, mocking laughter, or a voice hissing, "Leave while you still can." I changed our number twice, but it didn't matter. They always found us. Claire tried to stay strong, but the cracks were showing. One evening, I walked into the living room to find her curled up on the couch, knees tucked to her chest, staring at a pile of bills on the coffee table. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I see those letters, those faces at the meeting. They all hate us, Daniel." I sat beside her, pulling her into my arms. "They don't hate us, Claire. They hate what clothes made them believe. We'll clear this up." But the words felt empty even as I said them. The next blow came 2 days later. I came home from a supply run to find Claire standing in the kitchen, her hands trembling, a folded notice clutched tightly. "What is it?" I asked. She thrust it toward me. My stomach dropped as I read the bold header. "Final notice. Property foreclosure imminent." They were claiming we had defaulted on payments we'd already made. The document looked legitimate. Official stamps, signatures, everything. But I knew it was another fabrication. Claire's voice broke. "Daniel, if the bank believes this, if they even hesitate for a moment, we could lose everything." I crumpled the paper in my fist, rage boiling inside me, over my dead body. That evening, we tried to distract ourselves by sitting on the porch, sipping tea, watching the sun dip behind the peaks. For a few moments, it almost felt normal, until headlights appeared on the road. A truck slowed as it passed, its engine growling low. From the passenger window, a man's voice shouted into the fading light, "Go back where you came from!" Then something sailed through the air and landed with a thud on our porch, a glass bottle shattering into sharp fragments. Claire screamed. I jumped up, fists clenched, but the truck sped away, its taillights vanishing into the trees. In the silence that followed, only the sound of Claire's shaky breathing filled the air. She clutched my arm, tears streaming down her face. "They're going to hurt us." I pulled her close, but inside, fear clawed at me, because she might be right. The next morning, I marched into the sheriff's office. I was done waiting for things to fix themselves. Deputy Frank met me in the lobby, his brow furrowed as soon as he saw me. "Daniel, you look like hell. What happened?" I slammed the crumpled foreclosure notice onto his desk. "This, and last night someone threw a bottle at our cabin. My wife's terrified. If you don't stop Chloe, someone's going to get hurt." Frank picked up the notice, scanning it carefully. His frown deepened. "Damn, this is good work. Too good. Whoever's behind this isn't just some scammer. They've got access to real templates, maybe even real systems. Then why the hell aren't you arresting her?" I demanded. His jaw tightened. "Because every time I push, she waves paperwork that looks official. I can't arrest someone on a hunch." But he hesitated, lowering his voice. "I've been digging quietly, and I found something strange." I leaned in. "What?" "He's shaving his keeping his head. Chloe isn't in any county database. No employment records, no contracts, nothing. It's like she doesn't officially exist." The word sent a chill down my spine. "Then who the hell is she?" He shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Back at home, I told Claire what Frank had said. She paced the living room, running her hands through her hair. "So she's a ghost," she muttered. "No records, no ties. That makes her even more dangerous." "She's not invincible," I said firmly. "Everyone slips up eventually. We just have to be ready." Claire stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes blazing with determination through the fear. "Then let's make her slip." But the next week nearly broke us. The utility company cut our power without warning, citing non-payment. We lit candles and tried to laugh it off, but the truth was grim. They were choking us into submission. Neighbors stopped waving altogether. When we drove into town, people turned their backs. At the diner, our usual waitress avoided our table. And once, I overheard 2 men whispering at the counter, "Scammers, that's what they are. Should have never come here." Each word was a dagger. One afternoon, desperate for some sense of normalcy, Claire insisted we go for a hike. We packed light and followed a trail up the ridge, the crisp air biting our cheeks. For a while, it felt like the world was normal again, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant cry of an eagle overhead. But halfway up,
We found a sign nailed to a tree. It wasn't official, just a rough piece of wood with words painted in red. Outsiders not welcome. Claire stared at it, her face pale. Daniel, what if we really don't belong here? I tore the sign down, snapping it in half. We belong anywhere we damn well choose. This is our home, Claire. Don't let them take that from you. She nodded, but her eyes were filled with tears. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the cabin, every sound magnified by fear. Claire finally whispered in the dark, her voice trembling. Daniel, what if this never ends? What if they don't stop until they destroy us? I pulled her close, stroking her hair. Then we fight until they can't fight anymore. But even as I said it, I wondered if we had the strength. 2 nights later, things escalated again. We woke to the smell of smoke. My heart pounded as I leapt out of bed, rushing to the porch. There in the yard, a small fire burned, a pile of our mail set alight. Someone had dumped it, lit it, and run. Claire grabbed the hose, dousing the flames while I scanned the darkness with the flashlight, but whoever had done it was long gone. On top of the smoldering ashes was one half-burned paper, a single phrase still visible: comply or disappear. The next day, Frank returned. He looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. I've got something, he said, pulling a folder from under his arm. Chloe's been using county seals, but they're from outdated documents, ones that never got digitized, which means she had to get them from inside, someone with access to archives. Claire's eyes widened. So she's not working alone. Frank nodded grimly. No. And whoever's backing her knows exactly how to play the system. I felt both relief and dread. Relief that we finally had a thread to pull. Dread that the enemy was bigger than we imagined. Frank closed the folder. I'll keep digging, but you two need to stay sharp. If she feels threatened, she might escalate further. I thought of the rock, the bottle, the fire. My throat tightened. How much further can she go? Frank met my eyes, his expression grim. Further than you want to know. That night, as Claire and I sat in the darkened cabin, candles flickering around us, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control, fear, and Chloe wasn't going to stop until one of us broke. The morning after the fire, I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own home. The cabin that once felt safe and warm now felt like a fortress under siege. The smell of smoke still clung to the porch boards where the mail had burned. Every creak of wood, every rustle in the trees made my pulse race. Claire barely spoke over breakfast. She pushed her food around her plate, her hands trembling slightly. She looked exhausted, her eyes ringed with dark circles, her shoulders slumped. "Claire," I said gently, reaching across the table, "we can't let them break us. That's what they want." She met my eyes for only a moment before looking away. "What if they already have?" she whispered. I wanted to argue, to tell her we were stronger than this, but the truth caught in my throat, because I felt it too, the slow erosion of hope. And then, like a spark in the darkness, Hannah showed up at our door. She came in the afternoon, her small SUV kicking up dust as it climbed the drive. When she stepped onto the porch, I could tell immediately she wasn't here for pleasantries. She clutched a thick manila folder to her chest, her face set with determination. "Daniel, Claire," she glanced around nervously, lowering her voice, "can I come in?" We ushered her inside, closing the door quickly behind her. She set the folder on the table and looked at us with urgency. I'd been watching Chloe, recording her, taking screenshots of her posts in the neighborhood forum. She thinks she's untouchable, but she slips. She talks too much. Claire sat up straighter, her lawyer's instincts firing to life. "Show me." Hannah opened the folder. Inside were printouts of online messages, photographs from community meetings, and even a few blurry cell phone videos. She pushed one toward us. "This was from last week's meeting. Listen carefully." She played the video on her phone. The quality was rough, but Chloe's voice was unmistakable. "And if they don't comply, we have ways to make them. Nobody questions the board and gets away with it." Claire's eyes widened. She said board, capitalized, like it's real, but she admitted nobody questions it and gets away with it. That's coercion. If we can prove she's fabricating authority, this could be evidence. Hannah nodded. There's more. She's been in contact with someone she calls the coordinator. I don't know who it is, but every time she says that name, she lowers her voice. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The coordinator. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy thriller, but deep down I knew it was real. Claire's hands tightened into fists. This isn't just her. She's a pawn in something bigger. For the first time in weeks, I saw fire in Claire's eyes again. She flipped through the papers, her lawyer's brain dissecting every word. "Look here," she said, pointing at a document. "She uses county seals from 3 different years on a single notice. That's impossible. And here, the signatures don't match. Whoever she's working with is sloppy." Hannah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I think they're targeting more than just you. The Carters, the Whitmans, even that young couple down on Pine Hollow Road. They've all been pressured into paying bogus fees." My gut twisted. "So we're not the only victims." "No," Hannah said firmly, "but you're the only ones fighting back." That night, Claire and I sat by the fire, the folder spread between us. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides fear. I felt purpose. But with it came the crushing weight of danger. "Daniel," Claire said quietly, staring at the papers, "if Chloe realizes Hannah's helping us, she'll go after her too." "She already will," I replied. "The moment Chloe senses cracks, she'll try to shut them. That's why we need to move faster than she does." Claire took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she stacked the papers neatly. "Then let's build a case, the kind of case nobody can ignore." The next day, I called Frank and asked him to meet us in town. We chose a quiet diner at the edge of the county, far from prying eyes. When he slid into the booth, his face was weary but curious. "You said you've got something for me." I handed him the folder. Hannah's been collecting evidence, recordings, documents, inconsistencies. Chloe's not just a scammer, she's part of something coordinated. Frank flipped through the papers, his eyes narrowing. "Damn, this is good. Real good. Enough to raise questions with the feds, maybe." Claire leaned forward. "We need more than questions. We need proof strong enough to shut this down before they ruin more lives." Frank rubbed his temples. "You don't know how dangerous this is. If Chloe's connected to people inside the system, exposing her could paint a target on your backs bigger than you already have." I met his gaze. "Frank, the target's already there. They've thrown rocks, bottles, even set our mail on fire. How much worse can it get?" His silence told me the answer. A lot worse. When we left the diner, I felt both empowered and terrified. For the first time, we had a weapon to fight back, but we also knew we'd crossed a line. Chloe wouldn't forgive us for it. That night, as Claire and I tried to sleep, I heard something outside, a faint crunch of leaves. My heart pounded. I slipped out of bed, grabbing the flashlight and moving quietly to the window. In the glow of the beam, I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, standing at the tree line watching the cabin. The light hit them for only a second before they turned and vanished into the darkness. I stood there frozen, the beam shaking in my hand. Whoever it was hadn't come to knock or throw anything. They'd just been watching, waiting. When I finally crawled back into bed, Claire stirred. "What is it?" she mumbled. "Nothing," I lied softly, pulling her close. But my heart wouldn't slow down, because I knew the truth. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was surveillance. The following days blurred together. Claire buried herself in building a legal case, Hannah kept feeding us information, and Frank checked in quietly, always careful not to draw attention. But the pressure outside kept building. More neighbors turned cold. Someone spray-painted "scammers" on our mailbox. A dead rabbit was left on our porch, its fur matted and stiff. Claire cried for an hour after finding it, her hands shaking too badly to even clean it up. "They're trying to break us," she sobbed. "They want us gone." I held her tightly. "Then we stay, no matter what." But even as I said it, fear gnawed at me, because staying felt more dangerous with each passing day. One evening, Hannah called, her voice trembling. "You need to see this. Meet me at my house, tonight." Claire and I drove through the winding mountain roads, headlights cutting through the darkness. Hannah's small house sat on a hill, lights dimmed. She ushered us inside quickly, locking the door behind us. She led us to her living room where her laptop sat open. On the screen was a video clip, grainy and shaky, like it had been filmed in secret. Chloe sat at a table in what looked like a back room of the community center. Across from her was a man we didn't recognize, thin, balding, with nervous eyes. Their voices were low, but Hannah had boosted the sound. "They're resisting," Chloe said, her tone sharp. "The Hayes won't back down. We may need to escalate." The man nodded quickly. "The coordinator won't be pleased. Handle it before it draws more attention." Claire gasped. "There it is! Proof she's taking orders!" I felt a chest tighten. "And whoever this coordinator is, they're pulling the strings." Hannah's face was pale. "If they're talking about escalation, you two need to be careful, very careful." Claire reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. Her eyes were filled with both fear and determination. "Then we know what we're up against." For the first time, we weren't just suspects in some twisted game. We were players, and the stakes were higher than ever. That night, driving home through the dark woods, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, suffocating. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Claire finally broke the silence. "Daniel, what if escalation means violence?" I swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the road. "Then we make sure we're ready before they strike." The headlights cut through the trees, but in my gut, I felt it. Something was coming, something bigger, darker. And Chloe wasn't the only enemy anymore. By the time November winds began sweeping down from the peaks, I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see someone watching from the tree line. Every creak of the porch boards at night made me sit up in bed, heart racing. Claire wasn't sleeping much either. I'd wake in the middle of the night to find her sitting by the fire, papers spread around her, eyes hollow but burning with determination. She was clinging to her training as a lawyer like a lifeline. Me, I was clinging to her. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the waiting. Waiting for Chloe's next move. Waiting for the community to turn colder. Waiting for the moment the threats became something irreversible. That moment came sooner than I expected. One crisp morning, Hannah burst through our door without knocking, her face pale, her hands shaking. "They know," she blurted, slamming her laptop bag onto the table. Claire and I froze. "What do you mean, they know?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Hannah yanked out her laptop, opening it with fumbling fingers. On the screen was a screenshot of a message board post. The words made my blood run cold. "The rat among us has been identified. Don't worry, she'll be dealt with." Hannah's voice cracked. "They're talking about me. They know I've been collecting evidence." Claire reached across the table, gripping her hand. "We'll protect you. You're not alone in this." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. These people aren't just bluffing. I got home last night and found my tires slashed. Someone's watching me, too." I clenched my fists. Rage burned through the fear. "That's it. This ends now." That afternoon, I called Frank. His cruiser rolled up the drive an hour later, and when he stepped on the porch, I saw something different in his face. He looked tired, but there was steel in his eyes. Inside, Hannah showed him the screenshots, the slashed tire photos, the recordings. Frank leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "This is worse than I thought," he admitted. I've been talking with a contact at the Bureau. Turns out scams like this have been popping up in rural communities across 3 states. Always the same pattern. Fake boards, fake fines, intimidation. But you're the first ones to push back this hard. Claire's voice was sharp. So what are you saying? That the FBI already knows and is just watching? Frank sighed. They're gathering intel, building a case. But cases take time. Meanwhile, people like Claude get bolder. I slammed my fist on the table. We don't have time. They're threatening Hannah. They're trying to force us out of our home. Frank held up a hand. I know, and that's why I think we should set a trap. The room went silent. Claire leaned forward slowly. What kind of trap? Frank's voice was steady. We bait her. Use the evidence Hannah collected. Make her think you're ready to negotiate, ready to comply. She'll come in person, and when she does, we'll be ready with recording devices, surveillance, and backup. The Bureau's willing to step in if we can catch her red-handed. My pulse quickened. The idea of luring Chloe onto our turf was terrifying, but also exhilarating. Finally, a chance to stop running. Claire looked at me, her eyes wide. Daniel, what if it backfires? I squeezed her hand. Then at least we go down fighting. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Frank brought in 2 agents from out of town posing as contractors. They set up discreet cameras on our property, hidden in birdhouses and porch beams. Hannah helped install microphones in the living room. Claire drafted a fake letter, an agreement, suggesting we were willing to comply if Chloe could guarantee protection from further harassment. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait. Waiting was the hardest part. Every minute stretched into hours. Claire paced in the living room, wringing her hands. Hannah kept glancing at the window, jumping at every sound. I tried to stay calm, but inside my chest, my heart hammered nonstop. Finally, on the 3rd evening, headlights appeared at the end of the drive. My breath caught. She's here. The SUV rolled up, sleek and polished as ever. But this time, Chloe wasn't alone. 2 men stepped out with her. One tall and broad, the other lean with a sharp jaw. Both wore plain clothes, but their posture screamed muscle. Claire's hand clutched mine so tightly it hurt. Hannah's face was pale as chalk. Chloe walked up the porch steps, her heels clicking against the wood, that same smug smile plastered on her face. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I hear you're finally ready to be reasonable. I forced a tight smile. Come in. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Chloe sat at the table, her men flanking the doorway. Claire slid the fake agreement across the table. Chloe skimmed it, her smile widening. Good. This will make things much easier for everyone. Her eyes flicked up, locking onto mine. You see, Daniel, compliance is the foundation of community. Without it, everything falls apart. I leaned forward, forcing my voice to stay steady. And what happens if someone doesn't comply? Her smile sharpened. They disappear, one way or another. Claire's breath hitched. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, but Frank's cameras caught every word. I pressed on. And this coordinator, what role do they play in all this? For the first time, Chloe's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. Her eyes narrowed. You don't need to worry about that. All you need to know is that you're protected if you stay in line. She tapped the paper with her manicured finger. Sign it, and this nightmare ends. Claire's voice shook, but it carried steel. You mean it ends for you? You get what you want, and everyone else keeps living in fear. Chloe's eyes flashed. Careful, Mrs. Hayes. You've already caused enough trouble. Some of your neighbors are very eager to see you gone. The words cut deep, but I forced myself not to flinch. Suddenly, one of her men shifted, his hand brushing under his jacket. I caught a glimpse of metal, a gun. My blood ran cold. Easy, I said quickly, raising my hand slightly. No need for that. Chloe didn't even glance at him. Her eyes stayed locked on me. So, what will it be, Daniel? Sign or vanish? The room was thick with silence. Claire's hand trembled in mine. Hannah looked ready to faint. And then, like salvation, the sound of tires on gravel. Another vehicle pulling up fast. Chloe's smile faltered again. Her men straightened. A second later, the door burst open. Frank stepped in, gun drawn, flanked by 2 agents with badges raised. "Federal agents!" one barked. "Hands where we can see them!"
The night Chloe was arrested should have been the end of the nightmare. The sight of her being hauled out of our cabin in cuffs, her heels scraping against the porch as she shouted empty threats, should have brought relief. And for a brief moment, it did. Claire clung to me that night, her tears soaking into my shirt as she whispered, "It's over, Daniel. It's finally over." But deep down, I knew better. Because Chloe's final words weren't the rantings of a desperate con artist. They were a warning. And warnings like that don't fade easily. The following days passed in a haze. Federal agents swarmed through town, interviewing neighbors, collecting documents, combing through Chloe's records. News spread fast. Some neighbors stopped by the cabin, sheepish looks on their faces, offering apologies. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Carter whispered, wringing her hands. "Chloe made it sound so convincing. We didn't know." Others avoided us completely, their glares sharp as daggers when we crossed paths in town. To them, we weren't heroes. We were troublemakers who had brought the weight of the government down on their quiet mountain life. Claire bore it with quiet dignity, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. Hannah, though, was shaken to her core. One evening, she sat at our kitchen table, staring into her mug of untouched coffee. "I don't know if I can stay here," she admitted softly. "My tires, the threats online, I keep looking over my shoulder. What if Chloe wasn't bluffing about her friends?" Claire reached across, touching her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Hannah. You stood up when no one else would." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "But at what cost? I can't sleep. I jump every time a car drives past." I wanted to tell her it would get better, that the worst was behind us. But the truth was, I didn't know. Frank visited often in the weeks after the sting, sometimes in uniform, sometimes off-duty, always carrying the same weary determination. One night, after Hannah had gone home and Claire had gone to bed, Frank and I sat on the porch, sipping coffee in the cold mountain air. "She's not talking," he said finally, staring into the dark woods. "Chloe's clammed up, won't give us names, won't give us the coordinator. Just sits in her cell and smiles." A chill ran through me. "So what now?" Frank shook his head. "The Bureau's digging. They'll find something eventually. But until then, watch your back." His words settled over me like frost. Despite the lingering fear, life tried to resume its rhythm. We fixed the mailbox, replaced the charred boards on the porch. Claire returned to her casework, though I often found her staring off into the distance, lost in thought. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. And that silence became its own kind of torture. One Sunday afternoon, Claire and I took a walk through town. The air was crisp, the smell of pine heavy after a recent rain. At the diner, a few people nodded politely, while others pretended not to see us. As we turned a corner, we passed the community center, the very place Chloe had held her sham meetings. The windows were dark, the doors locked, but a faded notice still clung to the bulletin board. Claire paused, staring at it. "It feels like a ghost town," she murmured. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Better a ghost than a trap." But even as I said it, I felt eyes on us. I turned sharply, scanning the street. Just townsfolk going about their day.
And yet, the feeling didn't leave. That evening, Hannah called. Her voice was shaky. "Daniel, Claire, I think someone's been in my house." We drove over immediately. Her front door wasn't forced, nothing was missing, but her papers were scattered, drawers slightly ajar. "They wanted to send a message," Hannah whispered, hugging herself. Claire pulled her into a hug. "You're not alone. You'll never be alone." But the truth gnawed at me. If the coordinator was real, if they had people everywhere, then Hannah's bravery had painted a target on her back just as much as ours. Weeks turned into a month. Snow dusted the peaks, creeping down into the valley. Christmas lights appeared on houses, cheerful against the cold. But inside our cabin, cheer felt forced. Claire decorated a small tree anyway, insisting we can't let them steal everything from us. On Christmas Eve, we sat by the fire, sipping cocoa, listening to faint carols from a radio station. For a while, it felt almost normal. And then a knock came at the door. I froze, every muscle tensing. Claire set down her mug slowly, her eyes wide. I opened the door to find no one there, just the night, cold and silent. But on the porch lay an envelope. No name, no return address, just a single sheet of paper inside, typed neatly. "This isn't finished." Claire's hand flew to her mouth. My stomach turned to stone. We gave the note to Frank the next day. He scanned it, his jaw tightening. "They're testing you," he said grimly. "Seeing how you'll react. Don't let them see fear." But fear was exactly what I felt. Not just for us, but for Hannah, for anyone else who might be caught in this web. Life went on as it always does. Snow thawed the snow, summer brought tourists, autumn painted the mountains again. On the surface, we lived, we laughed, we rebuilt. But the shadows never fully left. Every ring of the phone, every unexpected knock, every anonymous letter stirred the old fear. And always in the back of my mind, Chloe's words lingered. "The coordinator knows your names now." One evening, nearly a year after the nightmare began, Claire and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. She leaned against me, her hand warm in mine. "Do you ever wish we'd left?" she asked softly. I thought about it, about the fear, the threats, the sleepless nights, about the scars this ordeal had left on both of us. And then I thought about our little cabin, the mountains, the life we had thought so hard to keep. "No," I said finally. "If we'd left, they'd have won. This is our home, and I'll fight for it until my last breath." Claire smiled faintly, resting her head on my shoulder. "Then so will I." For a moment, peace settled over us. But as the last rays of sun slipped behind the peaks, I glanced toward the tree line. And there, just for a second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows watching. When I blinked, it was gone. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe the coordinator was still out there, waiting. Either way, I knew one thing. Our story wasn't over. Not yet.